All right. How are you guys all doing tonight? Good? Anyone who needs a Bible, please go ahead and raise your hand. A couple of volunteers are passing them out. So, I have to admit, I've been preparing this message for about 3 weeks now. And this chapter has been a really difficult section for me to grasp what God had for us today. 1 Samuel is a historical narrative. And in some cases, it's hard to see the forest for the trees. Yet as much as this has been a struggle for me, I really do hope that you see the connection between our text tonight and the message that I have. Let's open up by coming before the Lord. Father God, Lord, thank you for this evening. Lord, thank you for this opportunity to come together to open up your word. Lord, I pray that as we do this, that it's not about my words, but yours. Lord, let them be magnified and mine fade away. Father, I pray that as we look at your love, Lord, that you will just help us to understand that more. This covenantal love that we have with you. Father, I pray these things. Give us ears to hear. And Lord, the words to say. Pray these things in your name, Jesus Christ. Amen. So let's open up our Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 20. Not the Psalms. We'll go there a little bit, but not right now. Follow along as I read. Then David fled from Naioth and Ramah and came and said before Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my guilt? And what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life?" And he said to him, "Far from it, you shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? It is not so." But David vowed again, saying, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes." And he thinks, "Do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." David said to Jonathan, "Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit at the table with the king. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field till the third day at evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, 'David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the clan.' If he says, 'Good,' it'll be well with your servant. But if he is angry, then know that harm is determined by him. Therefore, deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself, for why should you bring me to your father?" And Jonathan said, "Far be it from you. If I knew that it was determined by my father that harm should come to you, would I not tell you?" Then David said to Jonathan, "Who will tell me if your father answers you roughly?" And Jonathan said to David, "Come, let us go out into the field." So they both went out into the field. And Jonathan said to David, "The Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow or the third day, behold, if he is well disposed towards David, shall I not then send and disclose it to you? But should it please my father to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan, and more so if I do not disclose it to you and send you away, that you may go in safety. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die, and do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever, when the Lord cuts off every one of David's the enemies of David from the face of the earth. And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, May the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Then Jonathan said to him, Tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed, because your seat will be empty. On the third day, go down quickly to the place where you hid yourself when the matter was in hand, and remain beside the stone heap. And I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I shot at a mark. And behold, I will send the boy, saying, Go, find the arrows. If I say to the boy, Look, the arrows are on this side of you, take them. Then you are to come, for as the Lord lives, it is safe for you, and there is no danger. But if I say to the youth, Look, the arrows are beyond you, then go, for the Lord has sent you away. And as for the matter of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever. So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food. The king sat on his seat, as at other times, on the seat by the wall. Jonathan sat opposite, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Yet Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, Something has happened to him. He is not clean. Surely he is not clean. But on the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was empty, and Saul said to Jonathan his son, Why has not the son of Jesse come to meal either yesterday or today? Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, Let me go, for our clan holds a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. So now, if I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away and see my brothers. For this reason he has not come to the king's table. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said to him, You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. Then Jonathan answered his father, Why should he be put to death? What has he done? But Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. And Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David because his father had disgraced him. In the morning, Jonathan went out to the field to the appointment with David, and with him a little boy. And he said to the boy, Run and find the arrows that I shoot. As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the boy came to the place of the arrow that Jonathan had shot, Jonathan called after the boy and said, Is not the arrow beyond you? And Jonathan called after the boy, Hurry, be quick, do not stay. So Jonathan's boy gathered up the arrows and came to his master. But the boy knew nothing. Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. And Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy and said, Go, carry them to the city. As soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times. Then they kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. Then Jonathan said to David, Go in peace, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, The Lord shall be between you and me, and between my offspring and your offspring forever. And he rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. So there's a lot here. We see circumstances where Jonathan's blind to the murderous rage that Saul has for David. We see a bit of espionage. We see a test that's Jonathan and David put together to see whether or not Saul is out to kill David. we see Jonathan once again coming to David's defense. And as a result, Saul tries to kill him. We see a message that's conveyed through an archery skills test. But what I'd really like to focus today on is that covenantal relationship that's playing out between David and Jonathan. So, what is a covenantal relationship? You need to look at the word. So, covenant. What is a covenant? It's used so frequently in our Bibles. But what does it mean to be part of a covenant? The Oxford Dictionary has definitions for covenant as both a noun or a verb. In its noun form, it's an agreement. Put in legal terms, either as a contract drawn up by deed or a clause in a contract. It goes on to define it as a verb. It's that promise or agreement in action. So there's one more definition that I'm not going to touch on right now. But you see that this is a commitment or agreement between one or two parties to do something. So most of you may or may not know, I have spent my entire career working in the financial industry. So I've worked for a couple of different banks. And I've done everything from teller through documenting loans. So in my time in that loan operations area, I worked on documenting commercial loans and SBA loans. And I mean, we're talking, when they're signing these loans, it's a stack of papers. So as you go through these stack of papers on these large commercial and complex deals, there are actually covenants that are written into these where the borrower is going to pledge to provide additional information through the life of the loan so that it's demonstrating in that relationship between the borrower and the bank that they're able to still pay these loans. They're performing well. So these covenants that are in these loans, sometimes the borrower goes through and does a good job of bringing in these financials, keeping the bank up to date. Other times, not so much. Now, these covenants won't result in a default of the loan. So if they didn't bring in their financials, it doesn't mean that the loan's going to be called and they'll have to pay the money back all of a sudden. But what it does mean is it damages that relationship between the bank and the borrower. So as they need other financing, it hurts that. So these agreements not only are used today, but in the Bible, again, like we said, we see covenant being used in the Bible in that similar light where it's a formal agreement. We see it used to describe financial agreements between nations. You see it with Solomon and Hiram out of Tyre in 1 Kings chapter 5. We see the word covenant used synonymously with the treaty in an agreement between Joshua and the Gibeonites in Joshua chapter 9. We see the word covenant used in the agreement between David and Abner when they're bringing the two nations, the tribe of Judah and nation of Israel, together into that united kingdom. So how do we get from what feels like this stiff formal agreement to a covenantal relationship? This comes foundationally from the other definition that I alluded to earlier from the Oxford Dictionary. In the context of theology, covenant is an agreement which brings about a relationship of commitment between God and his people. It further goes on to say that the Jewish faith is based on biblical covenants made with Abraham, Moses, and David. But even as you look at this Oxford definition, it's lacking the heart of the matter. So let's take a look at how Sorry, I skipped ahead. So covenantal relationships are built around love, framed in by a promise. Now, we've talked about different types of love before. You look at the Greek words we're familiar with, agape, phileo, all these various words that we've heard over and over again. But tonight we're going to look at a Hebrew word for love. And that word that we're going to be talking about is hesed. This hesed love is tied to that covenantal relationship that God has with his people. And I'm going to say right now that I'm going to fail in any attempt that I make to show you the depth of this word, of this covenantal love, this hesed that God has. And Yair, yes, I'm probably mispronouncing it. You can tell me if I'm wrong.
It means mercy.
It actually is referred to the covenantal love, kindness. We'll go into it a little bit more that is one of the words that's used for it, but there are others as well. When you look at how it's translated, and we'll touch on this. So I did a search for that word, hesed, and it occurred 286 times across 279 verses. Some of the ways it's translated: steadfast love, kindness, loyalty, mercy, favor, beauty, devout or devotion, and faithfulness. So yes, mercy is one of the ways, but there are others. So, is this the correct word, Yair?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. But at least that's what Strong's Concordance shows me. So, hey. So, I think it's also important as we look at this to look at some of these verses that it's used in, because it helps us to understand that word, understand the meanings of it. So the first one I'd like to look at is when Jacob's looking back to the journey that God has brought him on and just marveling at how faithful he was for him and caring for him. We're looking back at Genesis 32, verses 9 through 10. And Jacob said, O God, my father, O God, I can talk, really. O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love or hesed, and of the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Jacob was looking back at what all God had done for him as he went in there. He went in there with nothing, just the staff in his hand. And here he's coming back. Two full camps of people. In Israel's journey out of Egypt, think about how often they grumbled against the path that the Lord was leading them on. This path that had purpose. Yet, we look here at Numbers 14:18, the first part of the verse. Moses is interceding on behalf of the nation. He's talking about how God's steadfast love, the Lord is slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, hesed, forgiving iniquity and transgression. Even as we look at the beginning of the Ten Commandments in Deuteronomy, God's hesed is declared for his people. I abbreviated this down. You shall not make for yourself a carved image. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, showing steadfast love or hesed to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. We'll see later that when Saul dies, the body and the bodies of his body and the body of his sons are desecrated by the Philistines. Yet we see hesed expressed by the men of Jabesh Gilead when they gather boldly, going forward in defiance of the Philistines to take down and bury the bodies of Saul and his sons. Now, why did they do that? If you remember back to 1 Samuel chapter 11, Saul came when they sent messengers out because they were under attack. Saul came and saved them. He provided the way of escape. It's one of the first things that he did. So now we see David praising them. David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, "May you be blessed by the Lord because you showed this loyalty or hesed to Saul your Lord and buried him. Now may the Lord show steadfast love or hesed and faithfulness to you, and I will do good to you because you have done this thing." As David's praising the Lord's deliverance from all of his enemies after he becomes king in 2 Samuel chapter 22-26, we hear him say, "With the merciful or hesed, you show yourself merciful. With the blameless man, you show yourself blameless." The Psalms are filled with the use of hesed. I'm only going to point out a couple because otherwise we could be here a long time. Remember 286 verses or times being used? In Psalm 50 verse 5, we see it, hesed being used to describe those that follow the Lord. "Gather to me my faithful or hesed ones, who made a covenant with me by sacrifice." In Psalm 18, "With the merciful or hesed, you've shown yourself merciful. With the blameless man, you show yourself blameless." In Isaiah 57:1, "The righteous man perishes, and no one lays it to heart. Devout or hesed men are taken away, while no one understands. For the righteous man is taken away from calamity." Over and over again, we see the undeserved love of God used in action in this word hesed. This love is covenantal. It's tied to God's promises to not only to the descendants of Abraham, but even man, when we look at the foreshadowing of Jesus when sin entered the world in Genesis 3. We see hesed in the promise that God extended to Noah after the flood. So I have to say, I love this illustration that Jake gave me when we were talking about this as I was preparing. He said that hesed is loving along the tracks of a promise. We see the character of God, his unchangeable nature, his steadfast love, his mercy, his faithfulness, providing these tracks that hold to the promise and will not let anything go, taking action in love. Now let's go back to our text and look at this covenantal relationship that we have between David and Jonathan. We see them bound together by a covenant of the Lord that Jonathan initiated back in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 3 and 4. A covenant with Hesed at its center. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. I hope that you remember when we were talking through this, the significance of what Jonathan's doing here. He's taking these items that indicate he is the Prince of Israel, the heir apparent to the kingdom, passing those on to David. Whether at this point in time Jonathan was aware that David had been anointed as the future king or not, we don't know. But over and over again, we're reminded that both Saul and his family have been rejected by God. And they will not be the future king of Israel. God intends to put a man after his own heart upon that throne. So at the start of chapter 19, Jonathan comes to David's defense before Saul because at that time he was telling his family and all of them to go and kill David. But when Jonathan came to David's defense, Saul swore not to kill him. But that didn't last long. Because now here at the beginning of chapter 20, we see David seeking action again based on that covenantal relationship that he has with Jonathan. At the end of the last chapter, Saul ended up pursuing David to Naioth and Ramah, where he's compelled to strip off his royal robes and lay naked on the ground, prophesying before the Lord. Again, symbolic that Saul is being stripped of the kingdom. God intends to hand it to another. So now David is coming to Jonathan so we can find out why Saul wants to kill him. He knows the firm ground that Hesed, their covenantal relationship, that it's built upon. And he's going to ask Jonathan once again to go to the king on his behalf, knowing that this could endanger his life. David says, therefore, deal kindly in Hesed. Deal kindly in Hesed with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself. So for why should you bring me to your father? You see, at the same time, David's saying that if I have done something that's worthy of death, deal kindly with me. Kill me yourself. Because I'm sure in David's eyes, Jonathan would be more merciful, more compassionate to bring him a swift death than what Saul may do. And we see Jonathan acknowledging again that David may be the future king of Israel with his request to David. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. Recognizes that the Lord is with David and is no longer with Saul. If I am still alive, show me steadfast love, Hesed, of the Lord, that I may not die. And do not cut off your steadfast love, Hesed, from my house forever, when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. So assuming that Jonathan survives going to Saul on David's behalf, and that God will put David on that throne, Jonathan's leaning into that covenantal relationship to protect him and his family when David becomes the future king. Because when you look at changes in power in the government, what usually happens? Does everybody who is there get to stay? No. Today, it clears the cabinet, right? They bring in new people. In that day, it wasn't quite so nice. Usually it involved a bit more death. It changed everybody. So Jonathan's leaning on that covenantal relationship for protection for him and his family. So looking ahead in our future studies, we see this covenantal relationship doesn't end here. That Hesed continues to live out between David and Jonathan. We even see David will search out and find, I'm going to slaughter this one, Mephibosheth. Bless you. Sorry. Jonathan's son, after he has become king. And he goes through and continues to show that love to David's family. He restores all the land that Saul had to Mephibosheth and has him come to his table each day. Now, while David and Jonathan stand out as an amazing example of this hesed shown by man, I would be severely remiss if I didn't look back to our primary example of hesed and God's covenantal relationship with his people. Looking back at Genesis 3, when sin entered the world, God demonstrated his hesed love for us by foretelling of a Messiah that would crush sin and death through his sacrifice. He gave the rainbow as a sign to Noah that he would no longer destroy the world by flood again. He brought Israel into being through his covenant with Abraham, affirming it with Moses at Sinai, and establishing an eternal kingdom through the line of David, fulfilling this through his own son coming down to be the perfect sacrifice to conquer death and atone for our sin through his death and resurrection. At the cross, Jesus forged the way for this covenantal relationship to go beyond his chosen people. The church is often referred to as the bride of Christ. And in it we see how marriage is also a covenantal relationship that displays hesed between husband and wife. Just this last week, my wife and I celebrated 26 years of marriage. More for her. She's had to put up with me. But when I remember back to that time of going through premarital counseling with our pastor, he asked us each to share what we thought love was. We had many of the usual responses you'd expect. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, definition of love. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. This is still the definition of love today. But my perspective on love lived out, or hesed, has grown. This covenantal relationship I share with my wife applies love every day when we fail each other. When I don't put her needs first. When I'm selfish. that love is still there. It's based on a promise. It's based on commitment. Our love lets go of wrongs. It forgives and remains committed, founded in the promise of that relational covenant. The covenantal relationships we see here between David and Jonathan are not mere formal agreements, treaties, or arrangements. Like in marriage, once they've been entered into, they're not easily broken. It should not be broken. It's built upon promise. It's built upon commitment. It's lived out in steadfast love, kindness, loyalty, mercy, favor, beauty, devotion, and faithfulness. Our foundational example of a covenantal relationship is between God and his people, between Christ and the church, displaying the nature of God through his hesed love. This love, running along the tracks of a promise, deepens and grows as a promise is lived out in our lives. From my limited understanding, it will only get sweeter with time. Let's close in prayer. Father God, I thank you for the love that you have for us. Lord, this love that you've demonstrated throughout time. Lord, I just thank you that we can trust in your promises, that you are unchangeable. And Lord, I pray that as we go into small groups, the discussion will be fruitful, that it will point towards you. And Lord, that we will just have a better understanding of who you are through this. Pray these things in your name, Jesus Christ. Amen.